Facing a vote on military action in Syria, many members of Congress are still deciding where they stand. We're joined by one of them. Plus, after announcing his second bid for governor online, Charlie Baker comes face-to-face with the press. And debating the merits of a mayoral forum for candidates of color only. Now on Greater Boston. Good evening. It's a position no one saw coming a year ago. President Barack Obama, who ran on an anti-war platform and is a Nobel Peace Prize recipient, making the case for a military strike on Syria. And while he technically doesn't need Congress's approval, he's now calling on the House and the Senate to endorse the operation. A Senate vote is expected late next week. And according to some reports, roughly half the chamber is undecided. The same goes for about a quarter of the House of Representatives. My next guest is among them. Congressman Michael Capuano, who represents the 7th District, joins me. Welcome.
Nice to see you, Emily.
I looked on your website in an interview you gave, and you came up with some really great questions that you'd like to see answered before you take a vote on this. But are some of them answerable? Like, for instance, the unintended consequences and whether taking some kind of a military strike will dissuade the Assad regime from ever using chemical weapons again. How can you ever know that?
They may not be answerable, but they have to be at least addressed, an attempt to answer them so that we have a better idea of what we're getting into. To me, I mean, I think there's been too much emphasis on the question of whether Assad actually committed this war crime. I think most of us accept the argument that he probably did, and we're willing to take that as a given. And that's the first step, not the last. The next questions have to be asked and debated and discussed, and to my mind, they haven't been.
How did you feel about Secretary of State John Kerry? He was so impassioned. There was such an urgency in his voice. He said, it's almost like we must do this now, more so than the president in some respects. You've known John Kerry for a long time. How did you respond to him?
Look, I like and respect John Kerry, and I'm glad that he's passionate about it because it puts forth the feeling that he's convinced of it, and that's important if you're going to make this case to people. But again, I like and respect John very much, and I'd like to be supportive of him, but when it comes to war and peace, friendship, party affiliation, and all that really goes to the wayside. Most of us really don't give it much thought.
You're suggesting that there's a possibility that this could, if it's possible, make the Middle East even more volatile. Mm-hmm. For instance, the Assad regime does not have a cozy relationship with al-Qaeda. This could strengthen al-Qaeda if they see a weakness in what's going on in Syria, because that's a whole other sectarian situation that is not unlike the rest of the Middle East.
That's right. It's that. It's also Iran, who has obviously been pursuing a nuclear weapon, and then most of us feel very strong that they shouldn't be able to get one. I have a fear that the next day that they would double their efforts in trying to get a nuclear weapon. Russia has certainly been playing in an interesting capacity in the Middle East, not in favor of creating peace in any capacity. And then plus the whole idea of the next day after we do a missile strike on Syria, seeing Assad or his people stand up and brush themselves off and all of a sudden say, that's the best you got, and becoming an instant hero in the anti-American community, attracting even more people that hate us into one place. I'm not at all convinced this makes anything better.
But one of the arguments that Secretary of State John Kerry made so passionately was about the use of chemical weapons itself, that we have a moral obligation, that even by the Geneva Convention, the treaty, we have an obligation to respond. We can't let, it's not that we're getting involved in their civil war. He's not saying we want to get in, but you can't go around slaughtering your people.
That's the strongest argument they have, and it is a clear argument that I actually share. However, murdering people by gas is only one way. I mean, there was no attempt to be militarily involved in Sudan when they committed a genocide of 1 million people. There was no attempt to be involved in Rwanda. Mm-hmm. There are many people who are very bad and evil to their own citizens, and we don't get involved in all of them because there's consequences the next day on a region, on a people, whether we can accomplish something. And I wonder, what do we really accomplish by simply doing a missile strike? I mean, if the proposal were to go in and take the Assad regime out, period, and just end it, I think that would be even a stronger argument. I probably wouldn't at this point, but at least I would see where the conclusion would come, and I might support it someday. I don't think we're there yet, but I do think that simply throwing some missiles into pound our chest to be morally superior, it feels good. And again, I think it is by far the strongest argument that the use of gas is completely immoral and it is clearly a war crime. But at the same time, we have war criminals that have been indicted by the World Criminal Court that have been invited to the United States and have come here without being arrested or tried. So I think that we best be careful about getting too high on that horse.
What would you do instead?
What would I do instead? Right now, again, I would look at it continuously. I would keep an eye on it. I'd try to continue to build world support for it. And I would still hold the threat of military action. I have never said take it off the table. I think that would be wrong. But I think that the military threat has to be done on a worldwide basis, not just the United States acting for all intents and purposes alone. But if the Brits are walking away, if most of Europe is walking away, if the Russians are opposed to it, I really think that leaves, are we the only moral arbiters of the world? If that's the case, we have a very long road to go, because there will be another moral outrage in another country tomorrow, and we best be prepared to go after everybody.
Is John Kerry taking this personally? As you know, in the 80s, 90s, and through much of the 2000s, he was a big proponent of, negotiating, as it were, or going to the table with the Syrians or the Assad regime. And now, you've got Assad basically thumbing his nose at John Kerry, saying, "You don't dare take us straight." He used those words. "You don't dare. They're too chicken to do this." So is he, belling up and saying, "Yeah, let me show you how scared I am"?
I hope not. I mean, look, people get involved with bar fights over stupid reasons, usually end up in a very bad situation. We're the biggest, baddest guy on the block in the whole world, and we need to take that seriously. If some little punk comes up and calls us a name or thumbs their nose, as the first reaction can't be military. It might feel good for a while to pound that person into the ground, but that's not the answer. I mean, that's the street corner answer, and it shouldn't be part of civil society. And I don't think that that's John Kerry's response. I think he feels strongly about the moral aspects of this, and I think he obviously is convinced that it will help solve the situation. And I give him the benefit of the doubt on that, and I credit him for his passion on the issue. I'm just not sure I agree with him at the moment.
He's putting Assad in the same category as Adolf Hitler, Saddam Hussein, saying that we know of. These are the only leaders of countries who have taken this kind of action against their own citizenry, and look what we've done there. How can we let this one go?
Well, again, right now, as we sit here, the president of Sudan has committed a genocide on the people of Darfur, has slaughtered people of South Sudan, is currently starving out the people of the Blue Nile and other regions. And we have taken virtually no action against him. As a matter of fact, we've invited highest members of his government to the United States. So, again, morality is a very important aspect. I think we need to keep our eye on it. We need to be aware of it. But it sometimes can't dictate the action. It is part of the consideration, but not the entire consideration.
Senator Ed Markey took a little bit of heat today for voting simply present when he was asked, when they took the vote yesterday in the Senate. Was that kind of a wimpy way out?
Look, I've known Ed a long time, and Ed's a very thoughtful guy who's, I think, proven repeatedly that he has the commitment to do what he thinks is right when the time comes. He just wasn't ready to vote on it, and I actually think that the vote on war and peace is the most important vote we take. And unless you're convinced of it, you should hold back. And in this particular case, it was only a committee vote. It's coming to the Senate floor soon. Ed will make a vote then, and I think people will see where he stands. And honestly, 6 months from now, this will be a tempest in a teapot. People will look back, and they won't remember this. They will remember how he voted on the final issue.
So far, not a single member of the Massachusetts delegation has indicated that he or she will vote for this. Does that surprise you?
No, not really. Again, we have a long tradition, a long history. I can only tell what's happening in my district, in my offices. We're getting contacted by a lot of people. Very few people are asking us to get involved. I don't know, 90 to 95% of the people that are contacting us, and this is thousands of people, are asking us, some vehemently, to make sure we vote no. I can't imagine it's much different in the other offices. I've talked to a few of my Massachusetts colleagues, and they're getting similar correspondence. But again, correspondence is only one. We're not getting, I represent 700,000 people, so that's only still a microcosm. But I'm hearing it on the street, and that's part of it. But I still say, I honestly believe, I hope, that war and peace is the most important vote that any member of Congress takes, and it's a conscience vote. It's not a political vote. It's not one, if I honestly thought that the people I represented were wrong on war and peace, I would vote against their interests, and that would cost me politically. So, it's just too important to send other people's children to war to vote on it for political reasons.
They say no boots on the ground?
They say no boots on the ground. I've read the Senate resolution. There's still some provisions in there that are very, very troubling, and particularly the one put in by Senator McCain that says it's the policy of the United States to replace the Assad regime. Well, that would be nice, but in my way of thinking, if the United States Congress votes for that provision, it empowers the president to then go in. And by the way, I wanted to disagree with one of the statements you made in the lead-in. I think it is absolutely essential and required that the president come to Congress. Throwing a missile at any independent country, no matter how bad they are, is an act of war.
He said he didn't need it, not me.
Fair enough. Okay.
He said he didn't have to.
I want to be real clear about that. Every president will probably say that, and I respect that. I just strongly disagree. I think war must be declared by Congress and only Congress. The Constitution actually doesn't give the president any power whatsoever to declare war.
Well, he's going to give you that opportunity.
And I appreciate that. I think it's the right thing to do.
All right. Representative Michael Capuano, thank you so much as always.
Thanks, Emily.